So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we have another siege, technically speaking, albeit this time we do have a 4v4 siege, so I would assume here that those on the defence have got a little bit less money to play with per army than those on the attack, so it'll be interesting to see how they've sort of set the table here. And this is on the Athelian War Camp map, or it's got a name along those lines. I think it might be Easterling War Camp or something like that. But it's definitely meant to be. It's definitely meant to represent the Athelian, I believe. At least that was certainly what the replay name was. But it's going to be quite interesting here. I think it is going to be 4 kingdoms of Western men who are going to be on the defence here, and then there's going to be a wide variety of attackers as well. So we'll go through the attackers first of all, because of course their job is very simple. They just have to move forward and try to overwhelm their enemies. Starting off here with Marshal Louis Nicholas Devout. Interesting, I'm just going to call him Marshal for the remainder of the game because that's quite a long name to choke out every single time. He's going to be playing as Harad. Harad, very useful on the attack, especially when you know you're going to be playing off against all Western kingdoms of men, because with the exception of Rohan, armour is something that all of them rely on to a certain extent to defend themselves up close and personal in melee, and AP is something Harad have in great numbers, albeit not in the Haradrim Spearmen. They're just more of a disposable single infantry unit here, a very low tier militia, if you can even call them that. They sort of stray into the lines being fodder, to be honest with you. Muhard Beast Tamers, bit of a phalanx as well, very useful for just keeping your line nice and solid as you try and move forwards, but early on, of course, ranged attackers, archers, javelins and the like, are really going to have a field day if they can get into range of something like this, especially with the Muhards, whose armour at the best of times is not brilliant, and the fact that they're unshielded only makes that problem worse, as it does for the Muhard Berserkers. Obviously, in the way that the evil factions tend to have, a cheaper armour-piercing infantry, obviously in terms of melee defence and overall survivability, they do lack quite a lot, but decent attack and the armour-piercing on top of that means they can be very dangerous, as long as they're supported properly. If you can sort of embed them into another unit of infantry, they can be decently effective, even in a situation like this. Southron Lancers for a bit of mobility out in the open field. There is a lot of open room, and several of the Western Kingdoms men have got some very nice cavalry. Obviously Southron Lancers are not brilliant in terms of overall quality, but they do offer you a bit of mobility, something to just get in the way and make sure that they're not running roughshod over you. Got some Trollmen and some Champions of Nathrat back here, so I would imagine that the Trollmen, they've gone heavy into the Trollmen. Like Harad, there really isn't a reason not to. Even if you're going up against factions which maybe aren't so heavily armoured, the Trollmen are still good enough to the point where you'd be mad not to take them, really. They've got such a good attack, they're capable of dealing damage against 2 Meba, and also all of them are multiple HP, Demons of the Desert, Trollmen, and obviously Champions of Nathrat being the strongest in melee of the bunch. And there will be another few units hidden around here, because the nature of this map is even in the less densely wooded areas, there's still quite a few places to hide. We have Proximus Centuri playing as Isengard. He's got some Urukai pikes, obviously a no-brainer in most situations for Isengard. They should probably wait until later on in the battle though before they move forward into the firing lines of many factions who have got good archer lines. Urukai Crossbows, again, if they can get into a good position, especially in a more open defensive position like an encampment is, crossbows can be really, really useful for doing a lot of damage to the defenders who can't afford to take losses as quickly as the attackers can in any situation really, and that's certainly something the crossbows can provide for the attackers if they use them correctly. Urukai Archers, on the other hand, their utility is really only going to be, well, their use is really only going to be in going forward, trying to skirmish with the enemy. They will lose the skirmish fight almost certainly, but they will absorb ammunition. They will make it more awkward for the defenders to use their ranged units in the way that they will want and perhaps need in order to win the battle. Half-Orc Spear Guard, the only really sort of standard spear unit that Isengard have. Obviously the presence of crossbows and pikes means they don't necessarily need it, but it is also the closest thing they have to a mass pushing unit, which all the other orcs do better than Isengard, to be honest with you, even if Isengard's focus on overall quality makes them just a little bit more well-rounded in regular fighting rather than trying to be hyper-aggressive. Orc Skirmishers, again, much like the Southron Lancers, will provide a bit of mobility on the open field. Up and over here we have the Nazkai and the Trolls of the White Hand, obviously exceptionally powerful armour-piercing bodyguard unit, the Nazkai, as of course the Trolls of the White Hand can be as trolls, but of course you do need to support them, otherwise they can find themselves isolated just by the way that they aggressively fight and plough into enemy lines. As well as another unit of Urukai pikemen there, and there's almost certainly some archers, or at least more archers than crossbows on the front. Then we have Pinkman, who's playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. We're going to see the Broodlings once again. In the last battle they initially didn't look like they were going to do anything because of misuse, but having said that, they did salvage themselves to the point where they weren't the reason why Evil lost that fight. Be interesting to see what they do here. There's a little bit more room for them to play with, and the defenders can't afford to let the Drake Broodlings just run roughshod over their whole army. Heavy Goblin Crossbows, very similar to the Urukai Crossbows in what they will bring to the table in this battle. Got some Cave Trolls, who unlike the Trolls, the White Hand will be much better at ploughing through lines and getting in behind things, causing a bit of chaos, which is definitely one way in which the attackers can try and win this fight. Heavy Goblin Infantry and Spears, a very numerous combination with the Heavy Goblin Halberds in the back there, so lots of numbers for the Misty Mountains. Quality, of course, is in question, as it always will be if you play as the Goblins, but AP at the very least, for not a lot of outlay. And there is also the Goblin King Bodyguard back here, which is where Azog is hanging out, and yet more cavalry, another unit of Warp Riders. It is interesting to see so much cavalry from the attackers. Perhaps they were really worried about the defenders bringing a lot of cavalry of their own, which, considering some of the factions on display, is perhaps not an unfounded worry. And finally, Ricky Beagle playing as Mordor. He's got some Orc fodder, as you will, because of how cheap they are. Some Morannon Halberds on the front. Got some Troll Drummers to keep his units in line, which actually I'm a little bit surprised that we aren't seeing some from the Misty Mountains. They often benefit greatly, or do they? No, they do. I thought that was just another unit of Cave Trolls, but they do have their Drummers, which is good, because both the Misty Mountains and Mordor benefit greatly from having a big morale battery in the middle of their army, because of course the morale on the lower tier troops for both factions is very fragile. Less of a concern for Mordor a lot of the time, because they do tend to bring some more higher tier units, so they're not as vulnerable as the Misty Mountains, but it's still a concern for them. We've got some Orc Maulers as well, obviously again in much the same way as the Muhad Berserkers, they will be useful. Olag High, much more similar to the Trolls of the White Hand than the Cave Trolls, and the rest of their army is sort of skulking around in the shadows, I guess. It'll be interesting to see what sort of army Ricky has brought. Most Mordor players do tend to go more quality heavy, because Mordor do have many options there, but it does often leave them a little bit short-handed in terms of numbers, ironically enough, when going numbers heavy is one of Mordor's greatest strengths in many ways. We have Lango, who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. He's playing as Dol Amroth. He's got some Tarnostian Spearmen, a lot of Doran Ernil Swordsmen on the front line as well, which this is what I was talking about. You know, you have to cut some corners, especially in a 4v4 siege. As the defenders, you are going to have a substantially lower budget per army as a result of that. So you're going to have to cut corners somewhere, and he's gone for a lot of militia swordsmen, which may not be the worst idea in the world, because they can still stand up to the lowest tier of Orc units, and they do offer a lot of numbers as well. And it's not as if Dol Amroth have got a hugely useful line infantry unit ahead of them that they simply must bring. The Ethelon Men-at-Arms are decent, but if you can save a bit of money to bring them and then maybe invest your money elsewhere, I think it'd be worthwhile. Ethelon Halberdiers, for example, are a good choice. Not only does it offer a phalanx on the front line, a very nice unit of Halberdiers this, but it's armour piercing, and they're not quite as vulnerable to trolls getting in and amongst their ranks as the more basic unit of Dol Amroth pikemen are. Some civilians, he's gone for some Black Swan Renegades, a Ballista, some Doran Ernil Archers, some Dismounted Knights to Silver Swan, which is where his general is, interestingly enough. But a decent amount of AP here for Dol Amroth. And I think that might be it, although there's actually some units over here as well, guarding this choke point. Wanderers of Nimrodel, when you're on the defence, Rangers are going to be worth the money that they cost. Belfast Marines, more Archers, and more Tarnostian Spearmen. So I like this from Lango, because he's not fallen into the trap of just deciding to bring all of his most expensive stuff. He's been a bit more nuanced than that, and he's decided to go for having quite a lot of numbers backed up by some decent upper mid-tier units. He's not dipped too heavily into his super high tier, which may actually end up being a good choice. We shall see. Moving on, we have King Elisar, who rather fittingly is playing as Arthedain. He has brought some cavalry, the mighty Knights of Annunus, the tankiest units of Lance Knights in the game. And they are actually squaring off against Mordor, who interestingly enough didn't seem to have any cavalry, albeit with the amount of cav the attackers are bringing, the Knights of Annunus really shouldn't be allowed to get all that much damage done for my liking. The attackers should be able to lock them down easily enough, but they're so strong that really it would take all three of those cavalry units to actually stop the Knights of Annunus completely. Fully upgraded Evendim Spearmen, they make a decent frontline troop. Don't really be fooled too much by their appearance. They're still a militia spear unit. I think it's quite misleading, to be honest with you, that you see them decked out in the full plate armour that you see the sort of more core units of Arthedain use. Yeah, they're a militia spearmen, so just take care when using them. They're not going to hold indefinitely against troops of superior quality. Dismounted Fornost Arraign Knights, very nice unit of heavy swordsmen there. Obviously got some Arthedain pikemen. You can see their Sans the armour upgrade, which is another sign perhaps they needed to save a little bit of money. But of course a nice phalanx here alongside the Annuminous Gate Guards. Provided the trolls don't get in amongst them too much, they should be pretty good at holding back the tides. Some Arthedain men-at-arms fully upgraded, so prioritising the armour on them, which I do actually agree with, because even an armour upgrade isn't going to save the pikes from being showered with arrows, to be honest with you. If you can afford it, sure, why not? It does help a little bit, but it is one of the first places I would go to try and save a bit of money, to be honest with you. Some civilians, some Evendim archers with the armour upgrade, so they should be good at skirmishing, but not necessarily the best damage dealers. Kind of the Poundland version of Arthedain's better archers. We have Gondor, played by Peter Hun. He has got some Ravenhounds of Carandros, really nice heavy armour on them, as well as having the melee defence that heavy swordsmen are known for. Interesting to see how they perform here. He's got some Gondor cavalry in there, so again, trying to save a bit of money. Yeah, more Gondor cav as well, so he's gone for a decent amount of them. Fountain Guard, very good at holding the line, of course. He's got some fully upgraded Gondor infantry. Vets of Osgiliath, really good. Archers, very heavily armoured, of course. Interesting that he's gone for the heavy swordsman. Perhaps he was... well, Harad are on the field, and heavy swordsmen will be better against them than the heavy axemen will be, so perhaps that was the thinking there. Gondor spearmen fully upgraded, Gondor infantry not upgraded at all. So a lot more of the basic units, spears, infantry, that sort of thing, standard Gondor cavalry. And then the final defending army, who's way out here, interestingly enough, so he's got a little bit of a way to go. He does have a back way in, however, so he's not really going to be caught, I don't think. There's going to be Lord Carmul, who ironically is playing as Dale. He's got some black shots and some Athala Rangers, obviously an exceptional ranged corps from Dale, which you can actually see in full effect here because he's gone for a lot of archers, even with a more limited budget. Black shots, Athala Rangers, 2 Bardian marksmen, 3 Dalian bowmen, so a huge amount of archers, which is decent, I think, because it does look as though it's an area in which the other 3 have tried to save a little bit of cash. And another unit, Bardian marksman as well. A couple of units of dismounted Earls of Dale, and then 3 units of the Barding Herd, which, as far as halberdiers go, are similar to the Ethelond halberdiers, but I actually prefer them because their armour is better and they have a shield value, which just makes them that little bit more resilient in a real battle situation. There is actually a couple of units out here as well, and it is Troll Slayers, so I mean King Elisar has made a dreadful error. If the Misty Mountains can close in on them, like, I would say that's fair game, personally. If the Misty Mountains can catch up to them, that would be a big loss, because those are expensive units that Arthedain can scarcely afford to miss. Like, it's probably the worst units he could have left way out here, to be honest, because at least the Knights of Annuminous could have scurried away more quickly. Without further ado, let's begin. And it will be interesting to see if King Elisar does realise his blunder, because, I mean, he can try and hide there for as long as he can, and they do reveal themselves now. And it'll be interesting to see if the Misty Mountains can react quickly enough. The Drake Broodlings can close the gap pretty fast, as well as, of course, the cavalry. But we'll see if Pinkman has got the courage to do such things. There are the Blackback Mountain Berserkers revealing themselves as well, another truly dangerous unit. I think maybe caught a little bit flat-footed there. I mean, as soon as they reveal... He could have put himself in range of the archers as well, but I think this is just... It's too big of a prize to pass up. If I were the Misty Mountains, I would be absolutely charging forward and trying to finish them off. Drake Broodlings and Wargs would be moving forward. It's risky, of course, because they can defend themselves very adeptly in melee, but if you can do a lot of damage to a unit of this price, probably the most... I would say, actually, we can't see any Dunedain Rangers. I'd be surprised if Arthedain omitted them. But outside potential Rangers getting into a good position, they would be the unit I'd be most concerned about if I were the attackers. Because they're so good in melee, but also very damaging at range. They can pick their targets at range, do a lot of damage to some key areas, and then in melee they can do a lot of damage, regardless of who they fight, whether it's a higher tier unit or potentially a lower tier unit. It doesn't look as though Dale is going to have any issues whatsoever in getting back to the settlement either. Dale's archers are going to be, I think, a big part of the defence, honestly. I like the composition. I think it's maybe one that seems obvious to pick as Dale, but particularly in this situation where I think the others have maybe invested in a few other areas first and foremost. I think the fact that Dale has gone so heavy into the archers means that the attackers are not really going to be able to establish themselves and just skirmish with the enemy. Not only do you have the lower tier archers of Arthedain, but you also have Dale, who are among the Western Kingdoms of Men, I would say even more so than Gondor. They're most at home in trading arrows with an opposition player. Gondor can do it very well, but not quite as well as Dale. Dale are also more reliant on it though. Gondor, on the other hand, have got more about them in melee, certainly, in terms of infantry. Neither of them is particularly great in cavalry terms, although Dale do have good melee cavalry at their disposal. So that does give them a bit of an edge there, but by contrast, Gondor have got better aggressive cavalry because they do have access to a higher tier unit of lancers. So it is an interesting comparison to make. Of the two, I prefer the playstyle of Gondor because ultimately a skirmish fight is all well and good. But Gondor are not that much worse than Dale in a skirmish fight, and Gondor are substantially better in melee, I would suggest. The Earls are a good infantry unit, but Gondor have just got so many good options. The Fountain Guard obviously at the centre of that, but Citadel Guard as well. I'm a big fan of the Axemen of the Sarnak. Their central units, such as the Gondor infantry over here, are nothing too special, but they get the job done, and not for a huge amount of money, whereas to get the same sort of thing for Dale, you need to go above and beyond really and spend the extra on the Earls and the Barding Herd, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very effective front line, but it's predictable, whereas Gondor have a few more options that they could potentially go for. And then you have the two more cavalry focused defending factions for today, albeit there's not a lot of cavalry action for either in Arthedain and Dol Amroth. Arthedain, of the two as well, I would suggest, are the more well-rounded because their cavalry is still very good. It doesn't have quite the same level of options as Dol Amroth, in much the same way as Dale have got more archer. They're better in terms of a skirmish fight than Gondor with their archers, much in the same way that Dol Amroth have got significantly more presence in terms of melee cavalry, but Arthedain's archers are substantially better than Dol Amroth's overall, and I prefer their infantry as well. A lot of it is based around these lads over here, the Arthedain plates, and the fact that Arthedain can re-wall up behind a nice phalanx, which may not be very damaging, but it is very cost effective. It's not quite so simple to do that with Dol Amroth, to be brutally honest. Moving across the field though, all of the attacking armies very much at home in this sort of environment. Mordor of course are. We should be able to see a few more of their units reveal themselves now. Yes, indeed we do. We can see the Minas Morgul Chosen. Much more of a fan of this model for the Minas Morgul Chosen than the older version of them. Much more menacing now. They had a sort of Jack Skellington logo on their shield before, which was more cute than menacing. But now, a very reliable unit that you often see from Mordor just because they're difficult to get rid of. They won't win you the match, but they will make it so your front line doesn't fold quite so easily. More Orc Maulers. It's a lot of fodder, so it does look as though perhaps a little bit more of a numbers focus. It's perhaps unsurprising to see the Nazgul because they can just very quietly go about their business in a frontline engagement, especially if they're going up against Doran Ernil swordsmen. That'll be a real bloodbath. As we start to see the advance across the open field. Be interesting to see how Pinkman handles himself as the Misty Mountains. He shouldn't be too concerned, to be honest with you, if there is an army that can absorb casualties at the hands of archers. More so than most, it is the Misty Mountains, but they can't afford to just go in there alone and be thrown to the wolves. Their allies will need to move in with them. Interesting to see the Snow Trolls as well. Fast, another good anti-cavalry option actually that you can bring because they're so quick in comparison to other trolls. And as long as they can avoid being charged, if you can put them in and amongst a unit of wargs, for example, it can be a really nice anti-cavalry option. But of course you can't afford to be skewered. Trolls, if they take a charge from some decent lancers, they're going to fall just like anyone else. The Misty Mountains are going to be going in through the front on their own, which surprises me a little bit. If I were to organise this, I would say that I would put most of Isengard's troops, if not all of them, going with the Misty Mountains, to be honest. It's maybe a little bit deceptive because this is sort of two smaller choke points in it. Well, I say that three technically. But I mean, this is still a nice wide open choke. And trying to sort of take advantage of that, I think, is the way to go. Whereas over here, there's just a lot more in the way. And that will allow, especially Dale's archers, to start picking you apart. Which Harad would certainly not respond all that well to. This, however, is going to be a problem for the attackers at some point, you would imagine. Wanderers of Dimridal getting themselves into a position adjacent to a choke point. They can shoot right along the line. It doesn't matter what faction you are, how good you are at dealing with archers. The sheer amount of hits that you're going to be scoring means the kill count is going to go through the roof, which is why you see Rangers getting over 500 kills in sieges on the regular. We've seen them get over 1,000 several times as well. Could happen again. And I think ranged power is how the defenders are going to have to play this, to be honest with you. There's a few key units like the Rangers, but generally speaking, the Ballista starting to fire. Dol Amroth trying to do their thing, and I mean the columns that the Misty Mountains find themselves in are a good target for the Ballistas to be going after. One of those cave trolls did fall, the rest of them however were just heavy goblin spears, but it will cause the Misty Mountains a bit of a problem if they continue to march in these columns. Snaga skirmishers also revealing themselves. And where are they going? I mean, are they going to try and go around to assist Mordor on this side? They're going to completely forego the front. As we saw in the last one, one thing that was a bit unfortunate. Some Bardian marksmen getting grilled by the ballista. Bit of unfortunate pathing there from the Daily and Heavy Archers. But as I was saying, as we saw in the last siege, the best thing the attackers did in that battle was spread out and pressurise every choke point. And at that they succeeded, but it was really their decision making once they had breached the defences that was the main problem. We'll see if it gets that far this time. The Evendim Archers starting to open up, doing a little bit of damage to the heavy goblins. They're a little bit scattered, mind you. But I don't think the Misty Mountains have brought anything in the way of archers. Goblin King's bodyguard are back there. Goblin infantry moving forward. The Warg Riders making sure their presence is felt. Forward come the Snaga. It will be quite interesting to see what they do. I mean, if they're unimpeded, do you go after the Evendim Spears? Maybe you do. They may not be the most glorious kills that the Snaga skirmishers could possibly get, but as long as they're standing here, they're going to get ripped apart by archers, so you may as well get those javelins downrange and hitting something. That isn't really enough though, you need all of your units to be throwing their payload there. A few of the Evendim Spears will fall as a result of this, but that's not something that Arthedain will be exceedingly concerned with, I don't think. Bardian marksmen continuing to fire. I mean, you may as well fire on the Snaga skirmishers, like they go down so easily. And with the lack of arrows coming your way from the Misty Mountains, the prospect of a skirmish fight is not really going to be happening. Unless you want to go javelin to javelin, but that's a very bizarre kind of fight to see. I'm not entirely sure where Mordor think they're going here. They're sort of marching over these hills on this side of the map. He's going the long way around here. I mean, I think I see what he's doing. He's trying to go over here so that he doesn't get shot by any archers that are over here. And he's going to try and go to the back edge of the settlement, but the assault is effectively underway at this point. The Misty Mountains has closed into a position where they are taking damage. So the clock is already ticking, I think. Isengard, Harad and Mordor don't have the luxury of all the time in the world. The Misty Mountains have moved in. They haven't fully committed yet, but they're taking damage, and more to the point, they're actually fairly isolated over here. Should the defenders wish it, they could just sort of really put the screws to the Misty Mountains here, and that would be bad news for Pinkman. But he is going to remove his Snaga skirmishers from the front as the civilians move in. Just as soon as that shovel was raised, the civilians decide instead to retreat to the relative safety of their frontal defences. More arrows being loosed. What are they going after, I wonder? Possibly the crossbowman. If that's the case, they should probably move up the hill just a little bit so their firing angle is a little bit more favourable, but I certainly don't disagree with the targeting of the crossbowmen because they're already taking damage. Yes, they're always going to have the same amount of ammunition, but the DPS is a factor here. Meanwhile, those civilians did get charged by the wargs. The wargs are taking a huge amount of arrow fire, however. It's not really going to be worth the Misty Mountains' time to use their warg riders in this fashion, really, because yes, you're going to get rid of the civilians, but that is the most disposable unit the defenders have, and the warg is going to do very poorly under this sustained arrow fire. They haven't taken as many losses as I thought they initially would, actually. It's also quite surprising that Arthedain didn't react more quickly with their Evendim Spearmen there. That would have been a really good fight for them to take. Pelargia Marines moving forward. A little bit of a well, I say a little bit, a lot of a misplay this from Gondor. Like, they should really be knowing a little bit better than to put their Pelargia Marines right out in front. This is not the sort of thing you want to be seeing as the defenders, because it's allowing a unit for the attackers, which they were probably expecting to not get a huge amount of kills at all. And now they're going to be able to sort of fill their boots, really, against a unit that could have been quite useful. Javelin men like this, especially in a choke point fight, can really make all the difference, especially against a faction which has got a pretty decent backbone to it, like Isengard. The ability to deal damage quickly can certainly come into effect. It's not something that the basic archers of Dale, Dol Amroth or Arthedain, or even Gondor, will really be able to do. Mordor now starting to move forward. Quite a few choke points back here, to be fair, and this is quite a large one, so I mean it's not the worst area to attack, and more to the point, I don't know if this is by design, whether he was paying attention or whether it's more of a coincidence, but he's going to be denying Lango the ability to use his rangers along that really nasty choke point that he could have been subject to. If he did notice that and has decided to do that decided to move wide based on that information, then that's good. But it's more probable, to be honest with you, that it's just chance. More arrows being committed in. Civilians taking yet another charge. This is probably the end of the Warp Riders, though. Actually, no, their morale went from wavering to shaken. They're just about clinging on in there. But with more arrows, the Avendim spears are now on the front line as well. Heavy Goblin crossbowmen are actually in position and firing. Albeit I don't know what they're actually firing at. Whatever it is, they don't have a good shot on it. The only thing around here that I would consider worth shooting with the crossbows, to be honest, would be the dismounted earls. Meanwhile, back here, Harad starting to move forward. Southron Archers. If there's one thing that Harad don't do too well, it's a skirmish fight. They're downhill of Dale. Dale are shooting into them. It's not really the sort of fight Harad like being in. But they have disposable troops. They have a lot of disposable troops, actually. Lots of Haradrim spearmen, Southrons that they don't really care about. The Muhards back here will do horrendously under arrow fire, but there is a limit to how much Harad will be willing to lose here, but for the time being, they're not under any immediate pressure to start changing their tactics, I suppose. And as soon as the assaults start happening on all sides, that would be when I as Harad would start to move in as well. Interesting to see here that Mordor actually moving in fairly quickly. A nice charge on the Orc Maulers. Shock Infantry getting an unobstructed charge is rarer than you might think. And the Orc Maulers there doing a good job at carving through the civilians, as you would expect. And there's not actually anything really in the way of archers back here. It may be, I mean, this is a bit of a blind spot in the defence for the moment. That is not going to be sufficient to hold the front line for very long at all. Over here you've got a little bit more in the way of archer support, but it's still just militia, basic spears. And you can see they are actually now repositioning more reinforcements on the way over. Tarnostian spearmen are on the way. Possibly these two units of pikes and a unit of line infantry from Arthedain as well to try and stem that progress. The Misty Mountains are also moving in, and they're not wasting any time either. In fact, they're committing something far more serious. The Blackback Berserkers are on the front line, and King Elisar's Evendim spearmen, and he's trying to maybe be a little bit frugal here, but fully upgraded Arthedain men-at-arms are not going to stand a chance against Blackback Mountain Berserkers. They're an exceptionally aggressive unit, and the best way to try and deal with them honestly would be to shoot them, but they're in a position that it's not easy to get a clear shot on, actually, interestingly enough. Goblin spears move forward as well. I mean, yeah, the Misty Mountains have got a good opportunity there. More to the point as well, it's looking a little bit thin on the ground on the front here. The Misty Mountains could start attacking on multiple fronts, and they could have a good deal of luck, actually. And again, they're moving forward with high-tier units. I like it. Goblin King Bodyguard, he's seeing the opportunity here. Opportunity knocks, and the Misty Mountains is going to open the door by the looks of things. A few units a little bit further back, and he's made a good start, but if he can continue to move in, and if Mordor can continue to do the same, the Grey Company are there as well, it could be a very fruitful side of the battlefield, to be honest with you, for the forces of evil. The Barding Herd doing a good job against the Orc fodder. Then come the Morannon infantry. The Barding Herd will do quite well in this engagement. I don't know where the Orc Maulers went. Surely they didn't all perish that quickly. There isn't enough dead bodies on the floor, surely. I say that actually, there are quite a lot of dead maulers there. Barding Herd are a very good unit of halberds, and they're getting some support now as well from the Tarnostian spears. So that should be enough to shore things up over here. But Mordor are doing the right thing here. They've moved in. Oof, Wanderers of Nimrodel shooting in there. That's going to make quick work of Orc Maulers. They'll stick around for a little bit longer thanks to the drummers. But, I mean, the Rangers are in full view at this point. They've revealed themselves. So Ricky should be able to shoot them here with his Moran on Archers, and that is exactly what he's doing. Nicely played. But yeah, you can see over here that it's not gone very well on this front line. The Misty Mountains has moved forward, and the Drake Broodlings are in amongst things now, which is the problem. They've got a huge amount of mass, and if you can keep them moving, they can just cause havoc. The Troll Slayers firing javelins in, but actually not at the Broodlings, and they're just going to roll on through. The Troll Slayers are a good unit, but they're light, so it's easy to pull through them, and now they're going to get into the Ballista as well. Well played from the Misty Mountains. Initially I was thinking he's in danger of the sort of player who would allow himself to be picked apart by arrows at range, but this isn't the case. And now he's really moving in, now he's really putting the pressure on. And they need to reorganise themselves here, the defenders, otherwise they are in danger of a downward spiral starting to happen. There are some Black Swan Renegades who are doing a good job on the front line, but they are actually shaken as a result of the chaos around them. Trolls are in there, but they're getting ripped to pieces by the Troll Slayers. So at this point, they are starting to mob some of the high mass units which have found their way into the defences. There's also the Grey Company getting in behind things over here. But I think there should still probably be a unit of crossbows back here. Well, there's 44 of them. I mean, surely the Grey Company still have ammunition, but they're going to charge in regardless, drawing their blades. I mean, they're clearly trying to shoot the right things. Speed is going to be key here for the Misty Mountains, but I mean, I appreciate the fact that they've moved in. They've decided on a moment. Proxima Centuri, he's still just poking away at the enemy with his Urukai Archers. Got a decent amount of value off of them already. Continuing to try and hound some of these unshielded units. I mean, of all of the factions, I would say Gondor would be the least appealing to try and attack into, especially with a phalanx like that. But eventually they're going to have to. At this point, if I were Harad, I'd be moving in. Seeing the chaos on the other side of the battlefield, you're fairly comfortable in that sense that there isn't going to be a great deal of reinforcements heading over here, and the full weight of your army, especially with trollmen included, going to be able to get through here. And that could be the sort of thing which decides the match in your favour, but the longer you wait, of course, the more risk you put. That Mordor and the Misty Mountains, if the other two on the other side don't move in, Mordor and the Misty Mountains will eventually start to falter in the face of this. Temple Executioners are in here though, doing a good job. In come the Olag High, so still Mordor and the Misty Mountains doing their thing, willing to commit their heavy hitters. Blackguard of Barad-dûr trying to go around. They're not the best in sustained melee, but they might be enough to defeat an already depleted unit of Bardian marksmen, to be honest with you. In fact, yeah, based on the numbers, I'd say definitely. But more reinforcements are on the way. Earls of Dale, Belfalas Marines. And you can see over here, this assault has started to turn a little bit sour. Closer, of course, to the archer support. A decent front line from Dol Amroth doing its thing. All of these units over here now certain in... well, they have a certainty that they're not going to be attacked through that choke point, so they can turn around. Those were the Wanderers of Nimrodel shooting into the Blackbacks, which is not what they're going to want, but chaos still reigns over here. These Fordoster Rain Knights have got a serious numbers discrepancy to try and make up. They may very well do it, but there's so many goblins running around that another unit may very well find their way into that fight. Of course, now Arthedain have got the perfect climate in which to use their cavalry as well, which is one of the main reasons why I would say the Misty Mountains assault probably isn't going to be what ultimately wins the attackers this battle. If they are to go on to be successful, it's going to have to be on the back of Isengard and Harad, and as if he heard me, Harad has started to move in a big way now. Haradrian Spearmen are starting to rout, but that's okay as long as they absorb a bit of damage on the approach. Dismounted Serpent Guard and Muhard Berserkers into the fray. AP combined with a bit of expertise in close melee. Really the key is going to be the Trollmen though. And unfortunately all of the Trollmen units are still a little bit too far away from my liking. They're going to have to rely on the qualities of the Serpent Guard to keep this assault going, but at the very least Harad is moving in. He's not hanging his teammates out to dry. He is going to try and make his way up this hill. And and Isengard look to be doing the same as well. Definitely, in terms of a melee fight, they've got the hardest task on their hands because these Gondor phalanxes were very well prepared. Urukai Archers and half-orc spear guard as well are not going to be enough to break down a phalanx whose centrepiece is the Fountain Guard. The Athelian Rangers are also right there, so it's a tough task for Proxima Century, but ultimately I think he does need to do this. I think there is actually a way that you can go around here. There goes the Misty Mountains General. Cleaved by an axe. What have we here? Warg Riders routing. I mean, they're giving as good as they get here, the Fallen Osterray Knights, but if they're to win, I think at this point they need to rout that unit of spears. Some Goblin infantry are in here. Yeah, this is the problem. I think the Misty Mountains did their thing quite well, but it was a risky thing to do, and ultimately the cavalry has exploited the gaps that they left as a result of their assault. But ultimately, if this battle does go south for the attackers, I don't think I'd blame it on the Misty Mountains. I think I would say that they moved in, and at that point, I think it's all about coordination. All of the attackers need to be doing the same things. Perhaps Harad and Isengard left it just a little bit too long. I think Mordor did their part, and they're still over here making life difficult for the Dol Amroth defenders that remain. The Black Swan Renegades struggling against Temple Executioners, Sauron's Will and Olag High. The Belfast Marines are also in melee, but they're in melee against Nazgul, so that's going to be a problem for them. Doran Archers trying to shoot in. I mean, they'll do good damage to Sauron's Will, even to Temple Executioners if they've been in melee for a good amount of time. Orc Javelins are on the way forward as well as Minas Morgul Chosen. And yeah, if I were Mordor, I'd keep throwing everything in, because you need to still be perceived as enough of a threat to warrant reinforcements. Because you really don't want to see reinforcements heading over, especially to try and stop Isengard's progress, who actually have managed to do a pretty good job there of getting around to the side of this line. That is a two-edged sword though, because while there is a gap they can potentially exploit now, they're being shot point blank by Gondor's archers. And if the Athelian Rangers can do that, it will be very, very ugly for Isengard. There is actually a unit of heavy Goblin spears over here as well, sort of giving Gondor something to think about as Isengard starts to pressure them from the front. Urukai crossbows on the way in. Yeah, they definitely need the support of their crossbows here if they're to have success. And you can see that's what they've already done to a certain extent. There's a huge amount of dead bodies over here as those crossbows that were already forwards on the hillock there have done a good amount of damage to this Gondor phalanx. But I think now for the attackers, the time has come to throw everything in, try and force the defenders into some breakage. Dismounted Knights to Silver Swan joining the fray, but it's not going to be enough here to stop Harad's momentum. They've got the Trollmen on the front line now, and you can see how quickly they start to have an impact on the front. There are Thala Rangers in behind. Don't know if they still have ammunition or not, but they're going to need to get into a place where they can start shooting some enfilading fire along the line, I think. The horn of the Haradrim blares in the distance. But yeah, at this point I think the attacker's best bet comes from Harad, really, because I think reinforcements will probably go to help Gondor against Isengard first. Just a feeling that I have. Looks like there is some units making their way through the settlement over here. Doran Archers moving backwards, as are the Blackshots. Mordor still proving themselves to be a bit of a problem. The Belfast Marines, I mean, this is the problem with fighting so close to the red line against fear-causing units like heavy trolls and Nazgul. If you rout, there's no chance you come back, regardless of how many men are still in the unit. Those Bardian marksmen. So yeah, Mordor actually arguably still more of a threat actually than Isengard at this point, because I think Isengard still have got a lot of stuff in their way, but Mordor doing well with not a lot of resources, I think, as well. The Misty Mountains are still somewhat intact. They have sent forward their heavy Goblin halberds, but well, yeah, they rout off. I mean, at this point they were given a bit of a daunting prospect to go head on alone, but fair play. And to be fair as well, the attackers have at least pressurised as many different angles as they could. From the front here it's always going to be quite a tough task, and that's without cavalry being present. Troll Slayers are in there, there's still Cave Troll Drummers, but they're routing off at this point, so yeah, that'll be pretty much the end of the Misty Mountains. Over here, meanwhile, there's still a lot of our arrows coming this way, firing into the Urukai crossbowmen. I mean, the Berserkers are right there, which would be a good choice for at least one of those archers to be going after. Yeah, this... I mean, the problem here is Isengard are engaging, but they're not really gaining the upper hand. They're sort of going through the motions a little bit here, but that's not really a slight against the player. It's just a reflection of the situation they're in. I think the best thing that could happen for Isengard is if Harad start to make some pretty rapid progress. You can see here that Barding Herd have clearly been hit by the demons of the desert. Too neat a patch of corpses there for it to be anything else. There's also some Doradernal swordsmen that have made their way over here though. And just getting more numbers in the way, I think, has sort of slowed the progress. In fact, over here, it is fairly even. They don't have the same level of damage here as Harad on the front line to Dol Amroth, but they're still proving themselves to be a thorn in the side. There goes Dale's general. Killed off by a massive serrated blade from the Sauron's Will. Still some Southron archers back here, but very low in number. You can see every volley from those Athala ranges that hits those beast tamers is doing massive damage. It's not really easy to get into a good position to shoot along the lines here for the Athala ranges, because if they do put themselves here, they put themselves very close. It's a big risk to put yourself there. Could be worthwhile though. Dale's archers still firing, albeit they're firing right up into the air. Harad's cavalry hasn't really been useful as a buffer against enemy cavalry, so they're now just trying to use them as a sort of a de facto mass pushing tool here really, to get forwards into these archers, start cutting them down. Scimitar blows raining down from on high. Doradernal archers still firing. There's still a few scattered units within the middle here. What about Mordor? Mordor are making progress, I have to say. He's definitely shown that the decision to go right around the widest angle of the map and attack over here was a worthwhile one. That much is no longer in doubt. The trolls closed with the black shots with the Minas Morgul chosen, and the trolls, that cost them their lives, but they did kill the black shots by the looks of things. At least to a good... well, I mean, the Nazgul may very well have been there as well. Not a single Nazgul has fallen just yet. Only 2 temple executions remain, however, so a lot of them have fallen. Still some Gondor cav there. Still some wargs as well. Warg skirmishers from Isengard. Good opportunity here, albeit they need to be... well, they're charging into Gondor infantry. They're not going to have as much of a charge, being a sort of ranged cavalry hybrid, but I mean... in fact, it wasn't a very good charge at all. They didn't do much impact damage at all, but this is still a problem Gondor have to address, and it's something that Isengard could really take advantage of. The trolls are here, and they're doing some good damage to the Gondor front line, I have to say. Gondor not really prepared to deal with this now. It's a big rout in the distance from Harad, however, and the wheel may be turning once again. It may be that Harad start rapidly running out of steam, as they are wont to do. They're not a faction with a huge amount of staying power, after all, especially not where rangers are concerned. And it may start coming down to Isengard, because while Mordor still have a little bit left, I think they can only play a supporting role at this point. And I don't think Harad are going to have the necessary strength left. These champions of Nathrat will make Dol Amroth and Dale pay to get rid of them, but get rid of them I believe they will at this stage. Defeat seems certain for the Trollmen. Defeat seems certain for the Serpent Guard. Celebrations for the Dalian Bowmen, but there's not a great deal of time to celebrate. You're going to need to get down here and help out. Muhard Berserkers joining the fray on the front line alongside Urukai infantry, but it's... are Gondor going to be able to stabilise? It looks as though they have to a certain extent. They've sent in a unit of Ravenhelms. The trolls have largely fallen at this point. There's only one remaining. Still a lot of pikes, but at this stage the archers not really able to get into a good position. Mordor heading towards the centre of the encampment is going to need a response. Troll Slayers, however, should be exactly the sort of response that... well, with the Nazgul there, like, Troll Slayers would be really good against Minas Morgul chosen alone in a vacuum, but with Nazgul and what remained of the Temple Executioners, that becomes muddied waters for Arthedain. Javelins coming in as well, scoring some good hits. Not a great deal of kills, because I think most of the javelins hit the wards of Minas Ithil, who are made of stern stuff, but a few of them should fall from that. Many of them do in fact get back up though. Moran on archers. I mean, Mordor are definitely running on fumes here. That's something the defenders can definitely take a good amount of solace in. The fact that really the only genuine army left at this point is Isengard, and they've already fully committed and they're sort of bottled up in these chokes. That alone would make it somewhat of an interesting conclusion. However, there's also going to be the reinforcements coming in for the defenders once they have managed to finish off Harad, which they will ultimately be able to do. And I think that is going to just about put it beyond the attackers. Unless the Nazgul really put the whole team on their back and start slicing their way through men at an alarming pace, to the point where they could potentially get in and assist Isengard. Thing is, like, there's no guarantee Gondor win these frontline fights. With Urukai pikemen in the numbers that they are, the Fountain Guard at this point will have taken losses. So maybe the frontline fights can go in Isengard's favour. They've still got some crossbows. There goes Harad's general though, which is only going to hasten their demise. Still firing in back there. I mean, any hits they get at this point will be worth it. The Dol Amroth ballista turns around, firing right through the Orc javelins. That's going to be nasty, but I mean, they can't fire through their own men, which is the problem. Otherwise, they may very well see the Nazgul as a worthwhile target to go after. One of them has fallen in combat with the Wardens of Minas Ithil. More of those Orc javelins fall by the wayside. Untitled Troll Slayers move forth. Another unit of them, of course. They've seen plenty of action already. They will put up a fight, but a trap that they could fall into here is just committing units one at a time to try and deal with the Nazgul, which will only increase their effectiveness. You probably need to try and mob them and get rid of them that way. Meanwhile, this fight over here has turned against Isengard. Since the Berserkers sort of ran out of steam, the Gondorians have been able to sort of take this fight more so. Berserkers obviously a very real threat to Gondor, but and so are the Urukai infantry, to be fair. They're a very strong line infantry unit, but the Berserkers are what is really going to do damage. Nazkai are back here, who are going to obviously butcher Gondor infantry, but they need to be quick. They need to get into the rear of this defensive line over here, cause it to shatter, and then they need to start moving in. What have we got going on over here? Ricky Beagle with another cluster of fodder and javelins. Looks like they just took a charge from the Gondor Cav, which is not great for them, but the longer that Gondor Cav sticks around, the longer those spears the fodder wield will actually cause some problems. The Gondor Cavalry is one of those really quite underwhelming units for me. Steps have been made in a few patches to try and make them a little bit more worthwhile, and they do have a place, but they're by no means... They by no means sort of warrant the brave charge to Osgiliath that we saw in the movies. That's much more the domain of the Mithrandir's retinue. These guys are like the Tesco value version of them. Design Troll Slayers. Halberdiers will make Mordor's job a little bit more tricky. Tarnostian Spearmen routing because the Saurons will. I have to say, Mordor have been the most impressive player on the field, I think. Their decision making has been good. The fact they still have an army at this stage in the battle that can still have an impact on proceedings is impressive. In the end, if the attackers do go on to lose this, it may just come down to the fact that they weren't quite as well coordinated as they needed to be against a defence which was always going to be tough to fully break down. All of these Western Kingdoms have got the ability to hold the line, Gondor especially, to be honest with you, and the fact that they're still here in the late game with good blocks of infantry is a problem. If this were someone like Dol Amroth that still had all this infantry left, the equivalent Dol Amroth units, who knows. The Numinous Gate Guards, again another nice unit of pikes this, 85 of them remaining. They're not exceptional by any means, they're not on the same level as the pikes that Imladris or Khazad-dûm get. But at this stage in the battle, where pikes, ranged threats are much less, a unit of quality pikemen can really be something which is an insurmountable obstacle to try and overcome. This over here though, I mean, Lango, he sent forward some units to try and help King Elisar's Shoal Slayers, but with more Sauron's will on the front, this is not going to go well for them. Interested to see how many Nazgûl still remain, because undoubtedly there will still be some. 8 of them, so only a further 1 has died. Wanderers of Nimrodel trying to shoot in. What's this? The Halberdiers reforming. What's situation over here. Dalian Bowmen. They need to get over there. Every man is going to count in this fight, I think. I do still think the defenders will be okay. I don't think the attackers have got enough left in the tank. Isengard's front lines are starting to look a little bit tired. A little bit sorry for themselves. And you can see Amroth's archers, they may not win this fight, but they are getting in behind, and this is a sign that usually things are going against you. Gondor are also starting now to wrap up the line. I thought for a second those fodder were coming in to help out, but they're not, they're just routing. Starting to wrap up the line. Having said that, Isengard may very well win this fight over here by virtue of these boys. The Nazkai still looming large, still a big threat. And this could be it. I mean, they're going to charge into the rear here. I mean, they're going to get charged in the side by Gondor Cav, which might be enough to kill off one or two, but yeah, this might be enough to break these units. Even the mighty Fountain Guard are shaken. Not enjoying this experience at all. As I'm sure you wouldn't if you were getting run through by one of the Nazkai swords. Gondor cavalry moving in. Still charging into the rear. They're going to be able to do some damage, but I mean, if it comes down to just a straight up duel between some units, that'll be something the attackers will be all too happy to take, I think. And actually, this is a big problem for the defenders. Just having a little look here, I thought they had a little bit more left, but maybe I was overestimating how much they had beaten Harad by. Those Annuminous Gate Guards have been wallowing in the filth a little bit here. They didn't really need to be the ones to be committed to deal with the trash. They could have just sent any old unit after them. A unit of quality pikes like this needs to be fighting off against, or helping to hold off, the more impressive targets, and that bit of decision making could prove to be very costly for King Elisar and his allies. Technically speaking, they are ahead on percentages, but it's the quality of troops that I'm looking at this point. Gondor are here. I mean, they're still fighting hard, to be fair. I don't know what they're doing. Those Fountain Guard need, well, they're going after the crossbows, but they will lose over here, Gondor, but they are fighting to the last man by the looks of things, which could be a difference maker as well, because if Isengard were attacking from the other side over here, it would be a real problem. A real problem. Right, whatever happened to the Nazgul? There they are. So there's still 7 of them left, that's the problem. And back when I said the Nazgul may have to put the team on their back and just do their thing, it's looking like that's exactly what they've done. They haven't done it all alone, they have received support from what's left of Ricky Beagle's Mordor force, but there's no doubting the fact that their strength has been a big problem. They just didn't have the quality to bog them down and finish them off. They had the quality to bog them down, but not finish them off, rather, the defenders. And this, to me, smacks of maybe not using key ranged assets properly, like the Pelagia Marines that were just left in the open, but particularly Rangers. I'd be interesting to see what level of kills the Rangers were getting. Athala Rangers are over here. Dale has finally come to life, having left his units over there doing nothing for a long time. Is this going to be enough? A unit of 35 Athala Rangers and 91 Dalian Bowmen. The Gondor force over there has crumbled in the face of Isengard now. Is this going to be enough? It might be enough to finish Mordor off, and if then they can turn around and get their pikes pointed at the Nazkai, that could be that. It's a very close battle, this. And still the attackers will be pretty much reliant on their big guns, the Nazgul and the Nazkai, being the ones to carry the day. Those Minismal Chosen and Sauron's will are getting the brakes beaten off them at this point, and actually, you know, they're going to just send the Dalian Bowmen to try and slow Isengard down. It's worth their while to do this, to be honest with you. The Dalian Bowmen will obviously not stand a chance against Nazkai, but they can defend themselves well enough, I think, to have this fight go in their favour, but they need to... The problem is, though, like, they're not going to have, I think, enough killing power at this point, the defenders. The Annuminous Gate Guards are all well and good, but the problem is they're just not going to kill off the Nazgul anywhere near quickly enough. And that might mean, in fact, that the attackers do go on to win this, because, yeah, these Dalian Bowmen... Not only is it Nazkai, it's Nazkai that are being backed up by pikes, so they've really never stood a chance. This is very impressive, and I have to say, the attackers did a good job. I think the defenders, they didn't respond to some of the initial attacks quite as well as perhaps they should have. Like, there was a huge force that was guarding that choke point over there for far longer really than it needed to, because it was quite obvious they were never going to use that choke point, and they still had too many troops over there when Mordor and the Misty Mountains were really threatening them. The Misty Mountains was playing the role effectively of the player who lays down their life, charges in, takes the hits. Again, as I say in most siege battles, it's not a glamorous job, but one of the attackers often has to do it, and the Misty Mountains are one of the best at doing it, to be honest with you. Harad, when the time came, they just about managed to commit themselves at the right moments, and that's going to be that. Isengard as well, they played a longer game, but very understandable. If I think it's the wrong thing to do, I will call players up on it, but on this occasion it was the right thing to do, because facing down a Gondor defence like that, you need to be a little bit more clever with what you do. If you just charge in, then your fate is sealed. I think, though, yeah, misuse of ranged units I think would be one thing that I think the defenders maybe had working against them. Also, not enough ranged units. I think, you can see the kill counts here. Dale had by far the most because they had the most ranged units, and they were always going to be a bit more reliant on their range to win this. In a 4v4 siege where the defenders have got less money to play with, the quality of your units ultimately is going to go down, which means in melee, chances are you're not going to reign supreme. So you're going to have to look at things in slightly different ways. But yeah, I think undeniably, I think the MVP in this particular match was Mordor. They went in very early, shortly after the Misty Mountains started to commit themselves, and they were still alive by the end after the Misty Mountains and Harad had fallen away. Just about, anyway. Isengard were the only ones with genuine units left, shall we say. But a well-deserved victory, I think, for the attackers. And again, it shows the benefits of just synchronising an attack from all angles. If you can do that one simple thing when you're attacking in a siege, it really puts the ball into the defender's court to try and be active. They need to do something, because if they just allow things to proceed as they will, 9 times out of 10, if the attackers can do that, they'll win. The defenders need to sort of start doing things a little bit differently. They need to position their units well. It's not enough to just have your archers firing down range. That's one thing that I would call Dale up on, actually. A lot of his archers, he got the most kills on his team, but a lot of his archers, when we saw them, were just firing up into the air. Inaccurate shots, not what you need in a situation like this. You need to be a little bit more aware, I think, of what your units are actually doing and where you position them. But a well-deserved victory for the attackers nonetheless. Let's see what did the damage for Dol Amroth. The Wanderers of Nimrodel doing very well, actually, slightly shy of 500 kills. I'd be interested to see what the Athala Rangers got. I would imagine it'd be less. But a good performance from the Dol Amroth Rangers. Dismounted Knights, the Silver Swan, did pretty well considering they were up against Harad, which is a faction that the Dismounted Knights probably wouldn't do too well against, at least the vast majority of their units. Let's have a little look. Ethelond Halberdiers. Mixed fortunes for them. Some of them who were fighting on the front line for a long time did well. Others were focused down and destroyed. Doran Ernil swordsmen, some of them doing quite well. It does go to show that these malicious swordsmen do have a use, but they're not world beaters by any means. Yeah, you can see a lot of the more basic units actually for Dol Amroth, like, very mixed. It was a few units that went above and beyond. The rest of them were probably slightly below par, if anything, which I think speaks quite well of the Mordor Misty Mountains assault. I think it just shows that the defenders weren't quite ready for it. And considering the amount of time that it takes for the attackers to march across the field, there's really no excuse for such things, I think. But still, a very good battle. Big thank you to Lango for sending this one in. So like I said, I have one more on the old backlog that I'm going to do for Reforged before I effectively start with a clean slate. That's what I'm going to be doing with replays. So if I have missed something that you sent, it's unfortunate. If you really wanted me to do it, then you could possibly resend it, and I'll do it that way. But yeah, like that's what I'm going to be doing. Sort of just in my own mind, I think it would be good to just sort of wipe the slate clean and start again with regards to replays. So I'm once again going to be looking for a steady new stream of content. If any of you have any replays that you believe would be appropriate, doesn't necessarily even have to be Reforged. It can be Silmarillion, or even other Total War games, I suppose. I mean, I know Rise of Mordor is a thing. If people want me to do a bit of that, then maybe we can branch out in that way. But yeah, regardless, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.